Ladies and gentlemen, the journey begins with a dream, a spark of an idea that seemed impossible at first. I was just a kid with a fascination for how things worked, always tinkering, always curious. It wasn't about fame or fortune. Those were distant concepts. For me, it was about creation, the thrill of building something meaningful from scratch. I wasn't interested in following a path someone else had laid out. No, I wanted to carve my own trail, even if it meant getting lost along the way. In a small garage armed with a few tools and an audacious vision, I started building something different. It wasn't perfect, far from it. Those early prototypes were clunky, inefficient, and often failed. But there was a fire, a conviction that these small steps would lead to something revolutionary. I didn't have a grand strategy, just the belief that the world could be changed by connecting technology to human experience in a way no one else had imagined. The initial days were raw, unpolished, and full of challenges. We had no resources, no roadmap, and certainly no guarantees. There were late nights spent debugging circuits, countless moments of doubt, and more rejections than I could count. I remember pitching the idea to people who would nod politely but walk away unimpressed. But every time a door closed, I felt a deeper resolve to keep going. Each failure was like a note in a song that hadn't been written yet, and I was determined to finish the composition. Partnerships became crucial. I wasn't doing this alone. I found collaborators who shared the vision, who saw beyond the technicalities and into the possibility of what could be. Together, we built not just machines but ideas, a culture of experimentation where failing wasn't feared, it was expected. Every mistake brought us closer to the answers we were seeking. We didn't know it then, but we were laying the foundation for something that would transform not just the industry, but the way people lived their lives. Money was tight, and time seemed even tighter. There were weeks when we weren't sure if we could keep going, whether the dream would collapse under the weight of reality. But the vision was clear, to create something not just functional, but magical. I've always believed that people can sense when something is built with love, with care, and with an obsessive attention to detail. That was the standard we set for ourselves, to create something so intuitive, so elegant, that it felt like an extension of the person using it. In those early years, the obstacles often seemed insurmountable. The competition was fierce, and the odds were stacked against us. We were the underdogs, the scrappy team in a crowded field of giants. But that disadvantage became our greatest advantage. It pushed us to be bolder, to take risks that others wouldn't dare. We weren't interested in incremental change. We wanted to redefine what was possible. And that's exactly what we set out to do. What I learned during this time was that creativity thrives under constraint. When resources are limited, you have to think differently, to innovate in ways that are both simple and profound. It wasn't about adding more. It was about stripping away the unnecessary until all that remained was the essence of the idea. That philosophy, that relentless focus on simplicity and clarity, became the backbone of everything that followed. Looking back, those formative days weren't just about building a product. They were about building a mindset that embraced uncertainty, that found beauty in imperfection, and that never settled for anything less than extraordinary. It was a mindset that saw every obstacle as an opportunity to grow, to adapt, and to evolve. The garage wasn't just a workspace, it was a crucible. It was where ideas were tested, refined, and sometimes discarded. It was where dreams collided with reality, where vision met execution. And it was where I learned that the act of creation is as much about resilience as it is about inspiration. It's not enough to have a great idea. You have to fight for it, nurture it, and see it through, even when the world tells you it's not worth it. Those early struggles weren't failures. They were the building blocks of success. They taught me that the journey is just as important as the destination, that the process of striving is what gives meaning to the outcome. And as I stood there, looking at that first completed project, I knew that we had only just begun. The real work was ahead, but for the first time I felt a sense of clarity, a sense of purpose that would guide every step forward. What started as a dream in a garage turned into a revolution, but it was never about the garage or even the product. It was about the idea that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to give up, when they believe in something so deeply that it becomes an unstoppable force. That belief became my compass, and it's what continues to drive me today. There's something humbling about reaching what you think is the pinnacle, only to realize it's not as secure as it seems. For a long time, I believed I was untouchable, that the momentum we'd built couldn't be stopped. The successes, the accolades, the sense of being on top of the world, it all felt like confirmation that I was on the right path. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, it all came crashing down. It wasn't gradual. It was sudden and brutal, like a punch to the gut. One day I was at the helm of something I'd poured my soul into, and the next I was being told there was no longer a place for me in what I'd created. The company I had helped build, nurtured, and led was moving on without me. It's difficult to describe that kind of loss, that feeling of being severed from something that had become an extension of who I was. The immediate aftermath was chaos, both internally and externally. I was angry, frustrated, and above all, lost. How could this happen? How could something so integral to my identity be taken away? It felt personal, though in hindsight I realize it wasn't. It was just the nature of the game, a collision of egos, visions, and circumstances. But in that moment, it felt like the universe had pulled the rug out from under me, leaving me to grapple with a void I didn't know how to fill. For a while, I did what most people do when they face a setback of that magnitude. I wallowed. I let the weight of failure settle in, and I questioned everything. My decisions, my abilities, even my worth. The doubt was deafening, a constant whisper in the back of my mind telling me I had been a fraud all along, that I'd been lucky, and now the world had figured it out. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. It strips away all the noise. When everything you thought defined you is gone, you're left with nothing but the raw essence of who you are. And in that space, amidst the wreckage, you find clarity. I realized that while I had lost a title, a position, and a company, I hadn't lost my vision or my ability to create. Those were still intact, and they were mine, untouchable by anyone else. I started to see this so-called failure not as an end, but as a beginning. It was an opportunity to step back, to rethink, and to explore ideas that I hadn't had the freedom to pursue before. And so, I did just that. I began again, this time without the constraints of an established structure or the expectations of others. I was free to build something new, not out of necessity, but out of passion. That period of reinvention was exhilarating. I took risks I might not have taken before, made decisions that weren't driven by profit margins or shareholder demands, but by curiosity and a desire to push boundaries. I surrounded myself with people who challenged me, who brought fresh perspectives, and who reminded me of the joy in simply creating for the sake of creating. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were plenty of missteps and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. I wasn't chasing success or validation. I was chasing an idea, a feeling, a spark. And as I poured myself into these new ventures, something amazing happened. I began to rediscover the very thing that had driven me from the start, a love for innovation, for pushing the limits of what was possible. Looking back now, I see that being pushed out of the very thing I'd built wasn't a failure at all. It was a lesson, a painful but necessary reminder that comfort and complacency can be just as dangerous as failure. It forced me to confront my own limitations, to grow in ways I hadn't imagined, and to come back stronger, more focused, and more determined than ever. Life has a way of knocking you down when you least expect it, but it also gives you the tools to get back up, if you're willing to see them. What I thought was the end of the road turned out to be the start of a new chapter, one that ultimately led to greater heights than I could have ever imagined. Sometimes the best way to move forward is to lose everything, to be stripped down to your core so you can rebuild with intention and purpose, and that's exactly what I did. I didn't just survive that setback, I thrived because of it. When you face a moment that feels like the end, something strange happens. You start to ask yourself, what now? It's not an easy question to answer when you're standing in the shadow of what you've lost. But sometimes the absence of a clear path forces you to create your own. For me, it was about starting from scratch, but this time with a sharper sense of what truly mattered. I wasn't burdened by the weight of expectations or the need to conform to an existing structure. Instead, I was free to experiment, to take risks, and to dream all over again. The idea of building something new wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about rediscovering the thrill of creating. That's when I started working on a project that would eventually become a platform for exploring the future. It wasn't about chasing immediate success, but about laying the groundwork for something meaningful, something that could push boundaries in ways I hadn't dared before. At the same time, another opportunity came knocking, one I hadn't anticipated but couldn't ignore. It was a chance to take a small, struggling animation studio and transform it into something extraordinary. When I looked at what this studio was doing, I saw more than just technology or storytelling. I saw magic. I saw the potential to bring together art and science, to create something that could touch hearts and spark imaginations in ways that had never been done before. This dual journey, building a new technology company while also nurturing a creative studio, taught me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way. The first was about patience. When you're starting over, there's no shortcut to success. You have to embrace the slow, steady climb, the countless hours spent refining ideas that might never see the light of day. You have to learn to fall in love with the process, not just the outcome. The second lesson was about collaboration. None of this could have happened without the extraordinary people I surrounded myself with. I found teams who weren't afraid to dream big, to challenge my ideas, and to bring their unique perspectives to the table. Together, we created an environment where creativity thrived, where failure wasn't something to fear, but something to learn from. There were moments of doubt, of course. Building something from the ground up is never easy, and there were times when it felt like we were making no progress at all. But every now and then there would be a breakthrough, a moment when all the hard work suddenly made sense. Whether it was a piece of technology that finally worked the way we'd envisioned, or a story that came to life on screen in ways that exceeded even our wildest dreams, those moments reminded me why I had chosen this path. The work we did during that time wasn't just about products or films. It was about changing the way people interacted with the world. In the realm of technology, we explored ideas that would later influence an entire industry. In the world of storytelling, we created characters and narratives that resonated with audiences on a deeply human level. It wasn't about the technology itself, but about the experience it enabled, the emotions it evoked. Through all of this, I began to see failure in a new light. It wasn't something to avoid or fear. It was a necessary step in the journey toward innovation. Each setback was a lesson, each obstacle an opportunity to refine the vision and push it further. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Looking back, I realize how much that period of reinvention shaped me. It taught me to embrace uncertainty, to trust in the process even when the outcome wasn't clear. It reminded me that true innovation comes not from following a roadmap, but from forging your own path, even when it feels like you're walking into the unknown. Those years of rebuilding weren't just about creating new ventures. They were about rediscovering my passion, my purpose, and my belief in the power of possibility. They reminded me that no matter how far you fall, you can always rise again. And when you do, you come back stronger, wiser, and more ready than ever to change the world. Coming back wasn't part of the plan. In fact, for a long time, I thought that chapter of my life was over. But life has a way of circling back to unfinished business, sometimes when you least expect it. When the call came, the company was in trouble, deep trouble. It was bleeding money, losing relevance, and barely holding on. On paper, it didn't look like a comeback opportunity. It looked like a sinking ship. But there was something about it, something that stirred an old fire in me. It wasn't just the company. It was the idea of what it could still become. Stepping back into those familiar halls felt surreal. The energy was different, heavier, weighed down by years of struggle and missteps. There were no illusions about how dire the situation was. Morale was low, and the future was uncertain. But despite the challenges, I could see the potential. Beneath the layers of stagnation, there was still a spark, a faint glimmer of the innovative spirit that had once defined it. The first task was clarity, figuring out what truly mattered and cutting away everything else. Over the years, the company had lost its focus, spreading itself thin across too many projects, too many ideas, and too many compromises. It was like a tree with too many branches, none of which were strong enough to bear fruit. The solution was simple, but not easy. Prune it back to the essentials, strip it down to its core, and rebuild from there. This meant making tough decisions, ones that weren't always popular. We had to let go of products, projects, and even people who didn't align with the new vision. It was painful, but it was necessary. The goal wasn't just to survive, it was to thrive, and to do that, we needed a foundation that was strong, clear, and uncompromising. With the slate cleared, the focus shifted to innovation. But this wasn't about chasing trends or responding to what others were doing. It was about looking inward, reconnecting with the principles that had always set us apart: simplicity, elegance, and a relentless commitment to quality. It wasn't enough to make good products. We had to make great ones, products that didn't just work but delighted, inspired, and transformed the way people lived their lives. One of the first projects we tackled was a product that would redefine the company's image. It wasn't flashy or groundbreaking at first glance, but it embodied everything we stood for: clean design, intuitive functionality, and a sense of wonder. As we worked on it, I could feel the old energy returning, not just in me but in the team. We weren't just building a product. We were building momentum, confidence, and a renewed sense of purpose. The launch was a turning point. Watching people's reactions, seeing their eyes light up as they experienced what we had created, was a reminder of why I had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about market share or profit margins. It was about creating something that mattered, something that resonated on a human level. From there, things began to accelerate. Each success built on the last, creating a ripple effect that spread throughout the company. The culture started to shift, from one of caution and hesitation to one of boldness and creativity. People were no longer just doing their jobs. They were contributing to something larger, something they believed in. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still setbacks, challenges, and moments of doubt. But this time, the foundation was solid and the vision was clear. We had learned how to adapt, how to pivot, and how to keep moving forward no matter what obstacles came our way. What I realized during this time was that coming back wasn't just about saving a company. It was about redemption. It was about proving to myself and to the world that failure wasn't the end of the story. It was a chapter, one that made the comeback all the more meaningful. The journey wasn't just about rebuilding a company. It was about rediscovering the power of resilience, the importance of focus, and the magic of creation. It was about taking something that had been written off and turning it into a symbol of what's possible when you refuse to give up. In the end, it wasn't just a return, it was a revolution. A reminder that no matter how far you fall, you can always rise again, stronger and more determined than ever. As the pieces began to fall into place, something profound became clear. This wasn't just about building products or even a company. It was about building a philosophy, a way of thinking that could permeate everything we touched. The goal wasn't simply to compete. It was to create a lasting impact, to leave a mark. This realization changed the way I approached every decision. It wasn't enough to ask, will this work? Or will this sell? The real question became, does this matter? Every product, every strategy, every move had to serve a larger purpose. It had to contribute to something meaningful, something that aligned with a vision far greater than quarterly profits or market share. That kind of thinking doesn't happen in isolation. It comes from listening, not just to numbers or trends, but to people. I spent countless hours observing, asking questions, and really paying attention to how people lived, worked, and dreamed. What frustrated them, What inspired them? What did they need before they even knew they needed it? Those were the questions that guided every step forward. Innovation wasn't just about technology. It was about empathy. It was about understanding the human experience and finding ways to elevate it. That's where the magic happens, not in the labs or the boardrooms, but in the intersection of creativity and compassion. It's in that space that breakthroughs occur, where the impossible starts to feel inevitable. But creating something that matters isn't easy. It requires an unwavering commitment to the details, the kind of obsessive focus that can drive people crazy, but also produces extraordinary results. I've always believed that every detail matters, no matter how small. Whether it's the curve of a design, the way something feels in your hand, or even the sound it makes, it all contributes to the experience. And if it's not right, it's not done. That level of precision doesn't come naturally to everyone, and it certainly doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, energy, and a team that's willing to push themselves beyond their limits, but the reward is worth it. Because when you get it right, when you create something so seamless, so intuitive, that it feels like it was meant to exist, it's like capturing lightning in a bottle. It's rare, it's magical, and it's unforgettable. There's a story I always come back to during these moments. It's about craftsmanship, about the difference between doing something good enough and doing it right. Imagine a cabinet maker who spends just as much time perfecting the back of the cabinet as the front, even though no one will ever see it. Why? Because the quality of the work matters, whether it's visible or not. That philosophy became a cornerstone of everything we built. It wasn't just about what people could see. It was about everything they couldn't see, the invisible threads that tied the entire experience together. But to create something that matters, you also have to let go of fear. Fear of failure, fear of criticism, fear of taking risks. Those fears can be paralyzing, but they're also a sign that you're onto something big. If an idea doesn't scare you a little, it's probably not bold enough. So we embraced the fear. We used it as fuel, as a reminder that we were stepping into uncharted territory. And that's exactly where we wanted to be. The products we created during this time weren't just objects. They were extensions of the people who used them. They inspired creativity, connected individuals, and gave them tools to express themselves in ways they never thought possible. It was never about the technology itself. It was about what the technology allowed people to do, to feel, to become. As those ideas took shape and found their way into the world, something incredible happened. People didn't just buy into the products. They bought into the philosophy. They began to see the possibilities, to imagine how these tools could change their lives. And in doing so, they became a part of the story, a part of the journey. Looking back, it's clear that the real success wasn't in the numbers or the accolades. It was in the impact. It was in knowing that what we created didn't just fill a need, it created something new, something that didn't exist before. It inspired people to think differently, to dream bigger, and to believe in what was possible. That's the legacy I'm most proud of. It's not about the products, the company, or even the success. It's about the people, the lives we touched, and the world we helped shape. Because at the end of the day, that's what really matters. As time went on, I began to understand that the real challenge wasn't just in building something extraordinary. It was in sustaining it. It's one thing to create a moment of brilliance, but it's another to make that brilliance last. To ensure that what you've built doesn't just thrive in your hands, but in the hands of others long after you've let go. That realization wasn't immediate. For a long time, I was deeply involved in every detail, every decision, every movement forward. It was my way of ensuring that the vision remained intact, that nothing got diluted or lost along the way. But as the work grew, as the impact expanded, it became clear that no one person could carry that burden forever. It wasn't about me. It never had been. It was about the idea, the philosophy, and the people who believed in it. The real task became one of empowerment. It was about finding, nurturing, and trusting individuals who could carry the torch forward, who could take the foundation we'd built and make it even stronger. That required letting go, which I'll admit wasn't easy. But it was necessary. If the vision was going to endure, it had to live beyond any one person's influence. even mine. What I discovered in that process was that leadership isn't about control, it's about trust. It's about creating an environment where people can do their best work, where they feel inspired, valued, and challenged. It's about giving them the tools, the space, and the freedom to explore their potential while still holding them to the highest standards of excellence. This wasn't about finding people who would agree with everything I said or mimic the way I thought. Quite the opposite. It was about surrounding myself with individuals who brought different perspectives, who could see things I couldn't, and who weren't afraid to push back when they believed in something strongly. Those were the people who made us better, who kept the vision evolving and growing. There were moments when stepping back felt like stepping away, like I was losing touch with the very thing I dedicated my life to building. But then I'd see what the team was capable of, their ideas, their innovations, their passion, and I knew that the future was in good hands. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about them, about the culture we'd created together, and about the principles that guided us. Sustaining a legacy isn't just about the work. It's about the values behind the work. It's about making sure that the reason you started in the first place remains at the core of everything you do. For us, that meant staying true to a commitment to simplicity, to quality, and to creating things that genuinely mattered. It meant resisting the temptation to chase trends or take shortcuts, no matter how lucrative they might seem in the moment. It also meant embracing change. The world doesn't stand still, and neither can we. What worked yesterday might not work tomorrow, and what people need today might be completely different from what they needed a decade ago. Sustaining a legacy isn't about clinging to the past. It's about adapting without losing sight of who you are. That's a delicate balance, and it's not always easy to strike. But when you get it right, the results speak for themselves. You create something that evolves without losing its soul, something that stays relevant while remaining timeless. And in doing so, you build something that doesn't just survive, but thrives across generations. The most rewarding part of this journey has been seeing how the ideas we planted have grown and taken on a life of their own. Watching people interact with what we've created, seeing how it's become a part of their lives, their stories. That's the real legacy. It's not in the accolades or the history books. It's in the impact. I've learned that the greatest measure of success isn't in what you achieve during your lifetime, but in what continues to grow after you're gone. It's in the seeds you've planted, the people you've inspired, and the change you've set in motion. That's what makes it all worth it. Looking back now, I see that the journey wasn't just about creating something extraordinary. It was about creating something enduring. And as I stand here today, I know that the story isn't over. It's still being written, not by me, but by the countless individuals who will carry it forward, and that, more than anything, gives me hope for what's to come.